Thank you all for joining us tonight to our fourth annual event paying tribute to the AAPI community. After 3 years discussing the urgent role of communicators in helping reduce racial violence against Asian Americans, tonight's event is our first ever to focus on the growing impact of the AAPI community on today's culture. And given the success this year of Everything Everywhere, it's high time we explore that. Tonight, we'll be getting perspectives from leaders across film, news, branding, PR, and media. But first, I'd like to recognize our sponsors, the Grady School at the University of Georgia, the IW Group, Google, Hunter PR, Pat Ford, Joyful Planet, Diversity Action Alliance, and Compro. On behalf of the Museum of PR, thank you all so much for your continued support. Now, a few individuals deserve their own special thanks for making tonight possible. Patrice Tanaka, head of Joyful Planet, who helped organize this event tonight and who was the original inspiration for creating an AAPI event along with Angela Chitkara. And that was back in the pre-COVID days of February 2020. Thanks also to Bill Amata, head of the IW Group, who helped us develop the theme and panels for tonight's show. Bill also serves on the board of the PR Museum. Thanks to Matilda Lindberg, the museum's associate director, for putting all the many pieces together over the past several weeks and serving as tonight's producer. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's MC, Dr. Bey-Ling Sha, the Dean of the Communications College at Cal State Fullerton, the first Asian American to serve in that capacity. Bey-Ling has had a number of firsts as an Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American. She was the first to author a PR textbook, to edit a scholarly PR research journal, to win Lifetime Achievement Awards from both PRSA and IPR, and the first to research the relationship between the individual and the practice of public relations. Thank you for your tireless dedication to our profession and for your devotion these past several weeks in prepping for this event. Now I'd like to hand the mic over to you, Bey-Ling, and wish all our panelists good luck tonight.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I am really honored to be here, and I know that we have tons to cover tonight. So let me start by encouraging everyone to chime in on the chat in terms of community building. And also please use the Q&A function to pose specific questions to panelists as those thoughts come up for you. Second, let me put out there that the acronym I'm going to use tonight is APISA, or APISAA, which stands for Asian Pacific Islander South Asian American. Last, I'll note that our main theme tonight, as Shelley said, is the AAPI community influence on brands, film, and culture. But I'm just going to point out that often when we talk about the influence of one thing on another thing, we're basically saying that those two things are different and separate. And that's really an oversimplification, because in my mind, we can't separate AAPI community influence from brands, film, and culture. In many, many ways, historically and currently, APISA community influence is the brands, it is the films, and most of all, it is the culture. We're not really talking tonight about that influence somehow being more powerful or more prevalent. I think we're really talking tonight about our own stronger recognition of an influence which has been part of US culture and society for centuries, even if people didn't know about it, even if people chose not to recognize it. So with that, let me bring on our first guest, John Iwata. John is no stranger to us in public relations, given his 35-year career at IBM. At IBM, John was Senior Vice President, Chief Brand Officer, and leader of that company's global marketing, communications, and corporate citizenship organization. Today, John is co-leader of the Stakeholder Innovation and Management program at the Yale School of Management, as well as a tech ethics and policy mentor at Stanford University. Because you know, he just had to cover both of the coasts. In addition, John is the founding executive director of the Data and Trust Alliance, a not-for-profit lab that brings together leading businesses to develop and adopt responsible data and AI practices. So thanks for joining us, John, and let's just get right to it. If you'll turn on your camera, there you are. Okay, so here's my first question. One criticism of AI or artificial intelligence is that because AI is created by humans, AI replicates human biases, which, as we all know, can often be based on external features like perceived physical ability, perceived gender, perceived race. So tell us about responsible AI practices and how the APISA community can influence those developments in positive ways.
Well, thank you, Bey-Ling. Hello, everybody. I appreciate your opening comments as well, Bey-Ling. So actually the promise of AI is to compensate for human bias, whether conscious or subconscious or unconscious. And because we are influenced by the people who are sitting across from us, for example, in job interviews and so forth, the promise of AI is that those decisions are going to be much fairer, more objective, more accurate, more precise, and so forth. That's the promise. The reality of AI, and just a bit here about what makes AI different than, say, just software. You'll hear the terms machine learning and deep learning, and I think the terminology is telling. These systems aren't just programmed and coded the way the apps on our phones are coded by human beings, software engineers. Yes, humans do create some software, but the systems learn, and they learn from data. And so if there are biases, the biases exist mostly in the data. For example, let's hire more successful salespeople in our company and use the data about successful people historically to find the next cohort of successful salespeople. If you've skewed toward certain parts of the population in the past, the model is going to learn, oh, that's what makes for successful salespeople in the future. So the first that we have to do is enhance our literacy about what makes these systems very different. And as part of that literacy, our role in that, all of us, as we either develop or build or use and deploy these AI systems, is to understand the biases could be in the data, and there are things we have to do to ensure the data is not biased. And if we detect that, there are things we can do to offset that. And secondly, people still make choices about what data sets go into these systems. Those are human beings, of course. And we have to ensure that those teams of people are themselves diverse in every dimension of diversity. And so they're not introducing, perhaps in an unconscious, subconscious way, bias in those decisions.
Yeah, I love that so much, especially the notion of diverse teams feeding into that process, because when you talk about machines learning from data that pre-exists, that almost suggests to me that that learning process reifies the past and it potentially reduces opportunities for breakthroughs, right? The person who didn't fit any of the parameters and yet got the job and yet was still so successful. But definitely, in addition to the pitfalls, as you say, there are a lot of promises to AI. And tonight, I think we're supposed to focus on the promising parts. So let me move on to my second question. Looking more broadly beyond the APISA community, for anyone who's working with business leaders in terms of DEI, what recommendations, John, do you have for anyone who is trying to navigate topics like responsible data and AI practices to ensure that they work proactively to enhance diversity?
Well, I just want to underscore that it's incumbent upon everybody now to enhance our literacy about AI. I'll give you an example. I mean, the conversation, and rightly so, for the past, 15 years has been, oh, data means privacy and data means security, like cybersecurity and so forth. Yes. But the new vocabulary, the new literacy includes terms like algorithmic safety. And the points that I discussed earlier, which is asking smart questions. We don't have to become machine learning experts, right? But since we're all going to be using these systems one way or the other, we have to be smart about the questions we ask, such as, tell me about the data sets that went into training these systems. Tell me about the teams that made those decisions. So that's specific to AI. But if I pull back and just talk about diversity in a business context, which is I'm most familiar with that, we have to treat DE&I as part of business management, which means there have to be objectives, there has to be accountability, there has to be rigor to this for it to really happen. And I've seen that in my experience at IBM. You treat it like it's a strategy, a business strategy. That's number one. And I just have to say something about the inclusion part of DE&I. I continue to see a diverse team, and I continue to see people who are quiet and who literally they're at the table, but they don't say anything. And if you're in the position of chairing that meeting or being in that meeting, and I see you're nodding your head, you know this happens. Whether you're chairing the meeting, you called the meeting, or you're participating in the meeting, when somebody has a breath of air in that airtime, say, hey, Bey-Ling, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts? We haven't heard from some others. Maybe you have nothing to offer here, that's fine, but we want to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts or ask a smart question of them. Don't put them on the spot, but do give them the opportunity. I liken it to being on that on-ramp to a busy freeway. And usually the blabbermouths in the meeting never give you an opportunity to say anything. And out of politeness, you just sit there quietly, and you'll never get your chance to get on the highway. So if we are already at the table, we have to make space. We have to do that, and that's just part of. I'm there, but I'm not really feeling included.
I super love the highway analogy because I grew up in Texas, and literally sometimes it is impossible to get on a speeding highway.
I grew up in the Bay Area, so
oh, that's worse. Yeah. So we have about 3 minutes left. John, I'm wondering, you have had a really illustrative and illustrious career. And so if you look back on that, what would you have done differently, if anything, and why? Thinking especially about our students in the audience.
Two things that I wish I had known or done differently that I would share. I had opportunities in my career when managers or others would sit me down and ask me straight out, so what would you like to accomplish in your career? What are your career objectives? In fact, one even said, how far do you want to go? And I answered the way I thought was the right way to answer, and the only way I knew how to answer, which is to say, I just want to add value and be a good team member and contribute, and I have confidence that my career will take care of itself. And I don't blame anybody except myself that they then said, oh, you sound like they concluded that I was happy where I was, and that was kind of it. But I got coached, and I would just offer that I confused for a very long time expectation from aspiration. And I would never say, this is what I expect from the company, implying that I've earned it and I demand it or so forth. It's not capable of that. However, articulating an aspiration of where you would possibly like to go and achieve, if you did that, gave myself permission to have those conversations openly. Second thing I would say is, as you go along in your career, and you accrue a kind of capital with people. And I heard it from the 3 CEOs I worked for at IBM, 3, and it must be something to it because they all said the same thing as they were retiring. They said, you never use the capital you had. When you build trusted relationships, people will listen to your ideas. Even they'll listen to you, and you shouldn't hold back if you know that people trust you. And I wish I had done more of that looking. So for those of you who are building that capital, take some withdrawals out of that bank account now and then when you have something you want to see happen.
John, that is such profound advice. And I want to just do a quick elaboration question, because many of us are from immigrant cultures where you just accumulate and you put money in the bank and you save and you save and you save, and you don't really want to spend anything, whether it's cold hard cash or whether it's social capital, right? And also, so many of us, people of color, a piece of folks in particular, women especially, do not feel comfortable articulating what we want because we have been raised to believe that that is somehow pretentious or presumptuous or grasping. So how does one get over that?
Practice. I've recommended to my mentees over the years, imagine somebody asking you, so how far do you want to go? And what they do is they immediately break eye contact with me. And I say, find a way. You don't have to change how you were raised. I like the way I was raised. You don't have to repudiate your culture or your values. I like my culture and my values. But this yields to some skill building. And as I said, I can say, well, my aspiration is to try to do these kinds of things in my career. And I hope that I can put together the experiences and the performance to get there. That feels very natural to me. If they say, well, like, how far do you want to go in the executive ranks? I still have difficulty imagining. I'm beginning to feel nervous right now, imagining me saying, well, this is what I expect. I can't do that. So how do you do that? I think it yields to some skill building. It yields to some preparation and some good mentoring.
Thank you. That is such valuable advice because it gives confidence to us knowing it's not something you're born with, but you can get there. It's a skill. You can learn the skill and you can practice. And for anybody who was forced to do a musical instrument as a child, I think we all know what that entails. So John, your wisdom has just been a wonderful start to this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as John leaves us, let me now introduce Carmela Glover. Carmela is the president of the Diversity Action Alliance, which is a cross-industry coalition led by communications trade organizations. The Alliance's mission is to accelerate progress in meaningful and tangible achievement in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the communications field, especially advancing people of color. In addition, Carmela is the director of DE&I for the Arthur Page Society, providing strategic DEI direction for both Page members and Page staff. Today, she is here with us at the Museum of Public Relations to present some new data from the Diversity Action Alliance. So go for it, Carmela.
Thank you so much, Bey-Ling, and that was an excellent opening panel. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me, Shelley and Barry, and everyone at the Museum of PR. As Bey-Ling just mentioned, I'm Carmela Glover, president of the DAA, and I'd love to briefly share with you some insights from the research that the DAA has been doing in conjunction with the Institute for Public Relations on race and ethnicity representation in public relations and communications. So as many of you may know, we are currently in our 4th year of data collection. So we've been collecting data for the last 4 years, and it is only representation data. It does not represent inclusion or equity practices within our field. We do have a study currently happening on equity and inclusion underway, and that's from the perspective of the BIPOC communicator. And so we'll share those results as well sometime soon. That study will show that the Asian American experience at work is not something that we can just lump together in an umbrella. We know anecdotally just from early results that South Asians, for example, feel more marginalized in the PR industry than their East Asian brothers and sisters. So there's a rich diversity within the, I'm going to say APISA, since that is the word that you're using, Bey-Ling, diaspora, and we must not continue to make the mistake of lumping all those experiences together. So to begin, I'd like to share that the DAA will be reporting out on the 3rd year of progress for our signatories and publishing that report at the end of this month. Again, we've just started collecting the 4th year of data from our signatories, which represent 300 plus companies across the US and globally. The data I'm sharing is just reflective of the US, and it reflects our year 1 and year 2 data collections. So that's 2020 and 2021 data. I can share, however, that the year 3 data from 2022, which again will be shared later this month, is not terribly different. So our 2025 vision at the Diversity Action Alliance is for this industry, for public relations and communications, to look like the communities it serves here in the US by 2025. The census projects that the Asian American population, which is the fastest growing race group, assuming that Hispanic and Latino is an ethnicity and not a race, it is the fastest growing race group in the country and will by 2025 be at 6.2%. by 2045 be at 8%. So keeping in mind that 6% number as our benchmark, and where the US population of Asian Americans is currently is around 6%. The first year, our sample size in PR and communications was 12,667 employees. In the second year, it moved up to 15,754 employees. From year 1 to year 2, the overall APISA representation grew from 6% to 8%, which sounds great and is progress and is actually closer to what the APISA overall US representation will be in 2045. But digging deeper into the data, in both of those data sets from year 1 and year 2, from those organizations who sent their employee data, there are 0% Asian Americans who are identified as the top communicators. So that means the chief communications officers or the agency CEOs or otherwise the top communicator in the organization, so an executive director, for example, at a nonprofit. None of them identified in year 1 or year 2 as having their top communicator as an APISA individual. Again, while this is not representative of the entire industry, 15,000 employees across all sectors in the US in PR and comms it's not a lot. It is a lot to have not any Asian Americans represented in that top communicator spot. In year 2, we saw an overwhelming percentage of APISA employees promoted, with 24% of all promotions going to APISA employees, compared to the previous year, where there were only 6% of promotions that went to APISA employees. Again, digging deep into the data, most of these promotions in both years only happened at the entry and mid levels. A Harvard Business Review analysis found that Asian Americans are the least likely group in the US to be promoted into management roles in white collar fields, from individual contributors to managers. And we do see that playing out here. We all have a responsibility to change and challenge the status quo and need to have the courage to not feel like the DE&I police when we call our colleagues in as tempered yet strategic radicals, which is the better way to penetrate our boardrooms, right, and our organizations, noting who is missing in the room. We want to see Asian Americans represented at all career levels, especially in leadership in our profession and society. In Congress, the AAPI demographic is only 2% of the Senate and 3.5% of the House, which is well below the actual representation in our US demographics. In shaping our culture, we need more Asian American leaders at the table. Last year at this program, we pretty much dispelled the model minority myth and poked holes in that fallacy. I like the way Lakshmi Ramarajan, a self-identity scholar, characterized it instead as a tempered radical who can operate both in the best interest of their company and in the best interest of social causes they care about, even if those two things are seemingly at odds. Some of the most powerful countries and leaders in this world, both historically and today, are not from Western countries. We know that Asian Americans come from a history of strong leaders and people, and we are blessed to have Asian Americans in a country that, much like it did other underrepresented groups, persecuted the Asian population in history. Fred Ho is one of my favorite social activists because he used his craft as a musician to advocate for justice, equity, and inclusion. He used to quote another famous musician, Sun Ra, and saying, "Everything possible has been tried and nothing has changed. What we need is the impossible." And that's a little bit how it might feel as we look at this data. Amid DE&I fatigue and little change, it might feel like progress is impossible, but I could not get up and go to work every morning without believing that it is. We have a very ambitious goal and vision for our future of our profession. You know that when the race is toughest, or for the current season, when you're at Game 7 in the NBA playoffs, fatigue does not mean a give up. To achieve the impossible, we must dig deep and use the data as well as our words, communicators. We can call in folks about tangible behaviors without disparaging our colleagues. We can point out what policies, processes, and behaviors are anti-Asian without calling someone racist. And the data doesn't lie. There is clearly a systemic issue here that deserves our attention. I'll leave you with that today, the challenge to change the status quo and lead communications into a stronger future where we can stand behind every piece of messaging that reaches our stakeholders. If you're not connected to the DAA and want to contribute to our data so that our stories can be told and so that we can all be seen in the data or research, or just to be a part of our network, please send us a note at hello@diversityactionalliance.org. Shelley and Barry, thank you again for this opportunity. I look forward to the insightful conversations and panels we have coming today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmela. I really appreciated that overview of the most recent research from the Diversity Action Alliance. You know, the fact that we have come so far as a community, and yet there is still so much more to do, is just kind of where it's at, right? But if you combine what you just said with what we heard from John Iwata, I'm actually now much more optimistic that we can get to where we want to be, not only individually, but also collectively, just by stating those aspirations and practicing, sharing where we would like to be and letting people help us get there. So thank you, Carmela. All right, now let's turn to our first panel. I'm going to introduce the speakers while they turn on their cameras. We have John Onoda, who is a principal at IQ 360 Inc. We have Shonali Burke, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Arena Stage. We have Min Cho, who is Account Director at the Gami Group. And we have Mananya Komorowski, who is Executive Vice President, North America Lead, Influence Strategy and Integrated Media with Weber Shandwick. So let me make sure that everyone is there. Okay, yay. And we might have one more person joining us, but until she does, let me just go ahead and start. So the way this will work is I'm going to ask each panelist a direct question pertaining to our theme, the media shift in brands, film, and culture. And then we'll do questions across the board. So again, audience members, step it up, put your questions into the Q&A portion of the webinar, or you can put it in the chat, but there's a lot happening in the chat and I just don't want to lose people's great questions, okay? So let me go ahead and start with Mananya. You have 20 years of experience with developing award-winning social and influencer programs. From a brand influencer standpoint, Mananya, what do you see as being the biggest media shifts over the past 2 decades, besides obviously the advent of social media and the proliferation of media platforms?
Great. And hi, everyone. This is an honor to be here. And that's a great question. I mean, in the past 2 decades, a lot has happened, right? But I would say in the world of social media and digital marketing, the past 5 years has been incredible in terms of making a shift in the media landscape in a positive way, right? So there's actually 3 key things that I truly believe brands and influencers have done better at. And the first one is the embrace of culture and diversity. And I know a lot of this too, Carmela actually covered a bit in her data, but I'll repeat some of it just because I'm speaking from an influencer and talent standpoint, right? So the first one, again, is the embrace of culture and diversity and understanding the importance of what that means and continuously being a steward for diversity in a meaningful way. So having worked in influencer marketing for over 15 years, when it was actually called the Facebook, and you had to have just like a college email address, just to give you some context on how like influencer marketing has shifted through the years. When it was called the Facebook, we had this thing called bloggers, right? And bloggers were actually paid $25 per blog post, if even that. But now on average to date, a blog post is between $8,000 to $10,000. I actually don't even want to tell you how much a TikTok is or a YouTube video, but it's pretty insane. And so that's to show you that this business of influencer marketing has been around, but the embrace of culture and diversity has come along with it. It's a lot slower than I wanted, but it has gotten better. And brands are understanding too that number 2, you can't tokenize and stereotype, right? So even though they're embracing culture and diversity and pieces were not prevalent in a lot of influencer or talent celebrity campaigns, now they're doing it, but we have to be careful that they're not tokenizing our influencers and our people. And so that's what brands have been doing a lot better at in the past 5 years. Sadly, their eyes were open out of social unrest and all of the gunk that happened, and that's not okay. But I mean, it opened people's eyes up in terms of like embracing D&I, right? So number 2, again, is that what's transformed is brands are realizing that they can't just like check off a box and say, okay, I've got pieces, I'm done with this campaign. So third is, brands are now realizing that the work is not done. And there's a couple of things attached to that, right? Is that one, they're learning that they have to be authentic. So by not tokenizing and stereotyping, because us marketers don't allow them to do that, they're realizing they actually have to have pieces and marginalized communities speak in their own voice, in their own way, based on their lived experiences. And even if that means it doesn't produce the best results or the messaging that they want, that is okay, because that's who we are. They can't silence us, right? And so, it's a continuous education for our brands to realize that they can't just be so focused on the business, because we're all humans. But at the same time, it is also my job to also educate the influencers and the talent that give the brands some time. We are teaching them, but it's also your responsibility too, to say no, to say why you're standing up for something. When a brief comes to you or a message is being tweaked, say no. That's not how I would say it. That's not how I lived my experience as an Asian American, right? And so again, 3 key things that's transformed has been embracing culture and diversity, and not tokenizing is the second one. And third, realizing that the work is not done. Those are the 3 things I've seen that's transformed.
Wow, Mananya, that is so great. And I really appreciate you bulleting point those out, because, it just makes it so much easier to take notes, and it makes it, frankly, a lot easier for college professors to write exam questions based on what you just said. I'd like to actually transition now to Shonali. As we look at the data that Carmela presented, and as we think about the information that Mananya just shared, I want to stay a little bit with this theme of representation. So some of y'all may know that Gold House and Nielsen Media just released last week a new report about what they call AANHPI representation. Those letters stand for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. Basically, in 2022, streaming content had more than twice the AANHPI representation on broadcast, and it was 3 times the representation on cable. My personal favorites on Netflix last year were Never Have I Ever, and of course, Bridgerton season 2. Those were hugely, hugely popular. But this particular Nielsen report doesn't include South Asian or the Desi population. And Shonali, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about that?
First of all, thank you for having me on. It's lovely to be here and to be with everyone. It's really terrific that you're hosting this conversation. So thank you, Shelley, and the Museum of PR. And I see some familiar names in the chat as well. So it's great to see some friends, old and new, here as well. I don't know where I'd stop if I started to share my thoughts on that, because, in a nutshell, we're not there. So I could talk a lot about that, and it might have to be done over some adult beverages. But, it's kind of ironic, because the shows that you named, in fact, are full of, certainly Never Have I Ever has a South Asian protagonist, Devi. And Bridgerton, of course, the second season was, very, very representative of South Asians and Indians in particular. So it's sad to me, because Indians and South Asians particularly make up a pretty significant percentage of the immigrant population. We contribute in a very large way to not just the global economy, but particularly to the American economy. And we're not seen, and that's how I feel.
Yeah, I actually wonder, tonight's presentation was scheduled for quite some time. But I also have to observe that we are running up against the Netflix release of Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story. Yeah, we're going to come back to you to explore this topic a little bit more, because there is a lot to be said, I think, for what are the letters that we use to describe our communities, plural, and then what are the letters that we use to describe just communities in general across the country. And there is also some conversation in the chat about that. So thank you, Shonali. So let me switch now from media platforms and media products to media companies and communications organizations. So my next question is to Min. So you are at the IGAMI Group, which has a very unique relationship with another communications agency, the Zeno Group. In this relationship, your two firms collaborate in a way that y'all have labeled agency allyship. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what that looks like, how your companies have benefited, and whether you think this model will be an enduring shift in how media and communications companies operate.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you to everyone for having me here today. I think a lot of people have touched on it so far, that the way that we're consuming content is different than ever, right? With, you know, the attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and the amount of consumable content is continuing to grow. And I think that poses a challenge on how we as marketers are trying to think of out of the box ideas to stick out. And so it poses an opportunity for us to think bigger. And I think it's through diverse point of views. It's by having the right people making the decisions, whether it's through marketing or comms or strategy, diversity in the newsroom, showing representation in front and behind the camera, not only by sticking your token Asian person in a campaign because it's AAPI Heritage Month, right? And so just going back to your question, you know, I'm at IGAMI Group, and we are known to be experts in the multicultural space, and our partnership, and Zeno saw that, right? So I think through the collaboration, there have been amazing projects that have come to life that have positively impacted our client brands. And I think that a lot of companies are going to continue to do this just to make sure, like I said, having the right people in the right room to make these decisions. For example, I am a Korean American woman, and I don't necessarily want to see an Asian commercial. That's not what necessarily resonates with me. I want to see a commercial that authentically resonates with me as an Asian person. So it's just those little nuances that we have to start thinking about and understanding to allow us the opportunity to better connect with people in this ever-changing landscape.
Thank you so much, Min. So I think before I go to you, John, let me go back real quickly to another panelist who just joined us. So welcome, Kaylee. So Kaylee So is a film director, and she is actually the director of a movie that just came out. It's a film called The Harvest. This film deals with a Hmong family. It's a drama. And the son in this family has returned home because of his ailing father. And in that process, he's struggling to reconcile his cultural obligation to family with his identity as an Asian American. Kaylee, in reading some of the background materials on your production, you know, this film project included at least 80% women and Southeast Asian folks as cast and crew. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit with us about that representation, both in front of the camera, behind the camera. What are some representational shifts you've seen in the film industry? Why are those shifts happening? And how can we continue to expand representation in our stories?
Sure, yeah, hi. Greetings, everyone. Sorry about being late. Yeah, with The Harvest, I kind of attributed that to Dua Mua, who is the writer, producer, and actor of the film. As he tells it, he's been working on this script for about 10 or 11 years, and it has been passing hands. And you know, throughout the years, everyone kept telling him to change the race, you know, and the behind the scenes did not look like what it did when Dua decided to produce the film himself. About a year ago, Dua said, I'm going to make this movie happen. I'm going to do it. I'm going to produce it. And I'm going to see if I can find a Southeast Asian American director to come on behind the camera. And that's what he did. He found me, and he asked me what I thought of the script, and I came on and I felt like I really knew the nuances of this Southeast Asian family, and it was very familiar to my own, even on a historical level. So I knew I could tell that story. And then in the process of it, you know, when we were finding like a DP or anybody else, we took into the consideration that we wanted to fill the behind the scenes with a lot of Southeast Asian or Asian, just to be able to tell the story as specifically as possible. And I think it'll work out really well. And I, you know, that's all, you know, grateful to Dua for being able to do that and for being able to say, I'm going to produce this movie. And I think that's where it begins with the creators or with people who say, hey, I want more Asian content, so I'm going to produce it myself as well. And so the more creative producer we have that are doing things behind the scene, creating these projects, the more we will see representation happen in front of the screen as well. And you can see that with a lot of like television shows that are coming out right now, like Beef, you know?
Yeah, which I haven't seen, so no one do any spoilers, okay?
Okay, we'll try not to.
Yeah, Kaylee, I know you just joined us, but I want to tie together what you said with some of the comments from earlier folks, you know, in terms of Dua and his insistence on really saying, this is the authentic experience, my authentic experience as a Hmong person, right? I feel like that ties back to what Mananya was saying, just in terms of people and brands realizing now the importance of authenticity, right? And it also goes back to what John Iwata was saying in our interview, that if you are in the room, if you have the opportunity, like Dua had the opportunity to be in the room, don't just be quiet, use your time at that place and speak up, right, for what's important. When you talk, Kaylee, about how representation in front of the camera and representation behind the camera are interconnected and they feed each other, right? This is really similar in public relations and communications industry, because we just heard some data from Carmela about how the top level, there is no AAPI representation, right? But it just seems like as we have more folks at the other levels, we can get more folks to the higher levels, and then that just becomes an iterative feeding process. I'm going to come back to you, Kaylee, but right now I want to move on a little bit to our next speaker. And people, we're going to come back and have more questions for the group, so just kind of think about everything that's being said. So now if I could go to John, you know, John, you have worked in the public relations industry for a long time. You've seen kind of the pipeline, you've been at the top. Your company, IQ360, where you're currently the principal, was founded by Lori Teranishi, who is actually on our next panel. And one area of focus for y'all's agency is ESG. Based on your 40 years of experience in this area, can you talk a little bit about shifts you've seen in ESG? And also, can you draw for us the direct line between ESG and the AAPI community? Why should we, as AAPI individuals, care about something that might seem like corporate nonsense jargon?
Okay, I think I'll, first off, thank you for having me. And I think I'm going to answer your questions in reverse order, because if you don't care about it, then whatever I say won't matter. So I'm going to try to make you care. ESG is a term that, you know, if you had to translate it to table talk, it would be like all the challenges we as collective humanity face: our planet, species, economic disruption, war, threats of all manner, is all encompassed by ESG. So basically, if you want to address ESG, you're trying to either make the world better or prevent it from getting much worse. And assuming everyone here plans to stay on this planet for a few more years, you should be concerned, because especially on the E part, if you've been reading about the news of various global conferences, we're hitting the point of no return. A 1.5 degree centigrade increase on the global warming temperature, in which really bad things happen, like the ice caps melt, the seas rise, fires become endemic, et cetera, et cetera. So you are the people hearing me, most of you are going to be living through this, and it is coming. It's not, if, it's when and how fast. And I have been at this for 40 years, and we were talking about this scenario 40 years ago, because it's all based on science and math and carbon discharges and population growth rates and the distribution of population, et cetera. So, you can put these into equations and chart them out. And what we said back then is essentially what is happening now. And if we extrapolate forward, it gets a lot worse. So there's this sense that we've got a window of opportunity to try to change things. So that's why I think you should be concerned. Now, for the AAPI piece.
You did a great job, because now suddenly I am super concerned.
Okay, good. Well, that's one for me. The AAPI piece is a lot of the people in our community are 1 or 2 generations removed from relatives and family in other places. And if they have a coastline, and as closer they are to the equator, they are going to suffer the most. And their populations are going to be displaced. Everything around the coastlines, the businesses, the fishing, the villages, and everything possibly are going to be displaced. I mean, if you look at Pakistan now, there's a lake in the middle of the country that's displaced millions of people. The coastal storms are going to get more powerful. So if you have loved ones anywhere fitting that description, or family, their fates are going to be impacted by this. Now, this is mostly due to carbon in the air, which is put into the air by the industrial countries over the last 100 years. That's mostly like the United States. So as in the way the world works, the rich developed companies sort of create these problems, and the people who suffer hardest and first are the poor, the indigenous people in the developing world. And the country that can most affect positive change is the United States. So if we are concerned about this dynamic, the Asian American community is going to want to use its voice to try to change American policy. And the more leaders we have, the more representation we have, the more politicians we have, those are all points that we can sort of use in our favor. We've got to reach this critical mass to influence the policy. And it will deal with war, starvation, fire, dislocation, reparations, all of those things. So my prediction is 1 or 2 decades from now, there'll be this very large debate of how much should the United States help these countries? Why should they care? And they'll completely blank out the fact that they largely caused the problem. I mean, that's just the way history works. And so if you want to be a powerful player and influence public policy, which addresses all these concerns, you are now sort of put on warning, like, get your act together and join the fight.
Thank you. That is really powerful. And I would also say that no matter how far we are removed from our immigration cultures, and no matter how closely we feel to our inherited cultures, all of us on this panel right now live in the United States. We will have to deal with the fallout from these human challenges, right? And you think about the anti-immigration rhetoric that has been prevalent throughout our nation's history. It's not getting any better. This sounds like ESG is one of those root causes, right? It's not just people coming for the American dream. They're coming because their homes have been flooded and they don't exist anymore, right? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to switch to a couple of general questions. First, audience, again, put your questions that you might have into the Q&A forum. And panelists, let me just ask you also to share your thoughts freely while keeping in mind that other people also have thoughts to share. So my first general question is, you all have just shared so much in so many different ways. Would any of you like to comment or respond to anything said so far by another panelist, or by John Iwata, or by Carmela Glover?
I'll start by saying, John, thank you again. I think I need a glass of wine or 3 now. But I think that's a good thing, because you actually articulate that in a way that is still compassionate, but yet urgent. And that's all I wanted to say. That was eye-opening for me. So thank you.
I'll jump in on something that John Iwata was saying about speaking up, both on a sort of personal conversations about what do you want in your career, and then when you are in the room. And I've been fortunate enough to be in the leadership teams, the room where all the decisions are made. I've been that at some of the major corporations in the world. And when you're in those management teams with the chairman and the chief financial officer, senior legal counsel, et cetera, there are presentations made at the monthly meetings, and someone is asked to talk about a report or talk about an issue, report on some development. And what the people coming in, and they're usually like vice presidents or head of business units, things like that, are maybe not fully aware as they're actually auditions for, are they people who potentially will join the senior management team? And in my experience, you can tell in about 30 seconds whether or not. The ones who are very focused on their topic and not connecting it to the real world or real issues or real people, they're just sort of reporting numbers. They're at that stage, their minds are not working the way you need to run a large organizations. It's the ones who come in and say, well, you're asking me this, but the real issue is this. Here's, and here are the trends in the world. This is going on with technology. This is going on with cybersecurity. Here's what's going on in currency exchange. Oh my God, here's the threat from chat, GBT, artificial intelligence, and what it means for our workforce. That's what we really want to know about. You were just asked, the door opener was this topic, but can you understand that whole range of issues are what people really want to hear about? Like, we need input from as many smart people as we can. And if you're given the opportunity and you don't take the shot, then thank you for your time, and we'll ask in the next person to try to do that. So what you want to do is train yourself to be that person. When you get your opportunity to speak up, like, don't hold back, don't be resident. And it's sort of like performance. You have to be very brave, and maybe you'll fall on your face. Maybe you'll humiliate yourself. But if you never try, for sure, you're not going to be asked back. So everyone needs to sort of be looking to become that person who can project, intelligence, passion, care, point of view. They don't want you to say what they're thinking. They want to know what you're thinking. That's the benefit of diversity. Yeah. So bring in that diverse point of view. I have a lot of conversations with people who, when I ask them these sort of open questions, I don't get much of a response. Like, they can't articulate it. I'm sure they're feeling it, but they're not articulating it. And so what I would say is practice. Yeah. Just go out with your friends, have a beer, talk about whatever it is you want, and practice actually articulating what's inside of you and bringing it out in a really compelling way.
Absolutely. And I will also say, John, that, the chat is open and the Q&A section is open for our viewers. This is your opportunity to join the conversation. And even if you never ask questions or you're not sure quite what to ask, practice. Put a question in there. We'll try to get to all of y'all's questions. Meanwhile, let me see if Shonali, Kaylee, or Min would like to add anything.
Yeah, actually, I've been thinking a lot about that particular subject, especially within the context of my own Cambodian American community. Our history is a genocidal history. So our parents have taught us to stay quiet, be more silent, not speak up, be small in a room, do not make any waves, because that's how you become resilient, that's how you survive. And you think on that point, and that's why maybe my generation or even the generation after me are not going into leadership roles or politics or things like that. And when you break the mold and you decide you want to become a director and you get into these rooms, like John said, you have to be able to be brave enough to speak up, speak louder, undo what you're taught, to stay silent. And I've been thinking a lot about that, because now I'm in a position in which I have to tell younger filmmakers how to pitch and, what kind of stories they can tell. Because when I first started, I remember somebody asking me, am I only going to be making Cambodian American films? And I had only made one short Cambodian American film. And I was just taken aback by this question, because I wasn't thinking I was making a Cambodian American film. I was making a film that spoke to me in that very moment. And that was what my voice was. And then a decade later, people are asking me to pitch stories that are Cambodian American. So it's a strange arc for me, because now I get to tell the stories that I want to tell, and people want to hear those stories. But yeah, I consider that conversation a lot, about how you have to go into a room and kind of be brave and be able to tell your story. And that's what I kind of try to do now.
That's such a great cultural insight. And I think we have to acknowledge that the survival practices that we've inherited that got us to this point are not the survival practices that will get us to the next point. Staying silent is what got our people before us to this point. For us to really make it moving forward, we can no longer be silent. Shonali, did you want to add something? I saw you start to say something, and then maybe Min, and then we'll wrap up this panel.
Yeah, thank you. Well, many things, but I'll try to keep it succinct. The first is I completely agree about speaking up, but I think, I went back to school several years, well, not several years ago, a few years ago, for a business analytics program. And so there was no dearth of South Asian and representation in that. But even then, when you come from, I came from the arts, from PR, from marketing, and I was among data scientists and engineers. And though I pride myself on my analytics interest and ability, I was nowhere near their level of expertise. I felt diffident speaking up. So I think it's really important to remember that there is always a different power dynamic. And particularly when people are earlier in their careers, they don't necessarily feel the same confidence that comes after 20, 25, and longer years in the field. To that point, something one of my professors in that program said to me, she was part of the EDI initiative at the university, and she was very, very committed to making sure there was representation in the room. And one of the, in a small group discussion that we were having, one of the folk in my cohort, who was an older white American, successful executive, was listening very intently. And he said, what can we do? Like, how do we help? Like, we want to make sure we're being respectful, but how do we help? And she said, it's really important for you to be advocates. And I remember being really struck by that. And I think that's something that we can do, now that we're at a certain stage in our careers, really looking out for people who might not have that confidence to speak up yet, and giving them the boost that they need to do that, giving them the platform that they need to do it. When I had I'll share one quick story and then I'll pass the mic back to you. When I had joined Arena, I was just a few months in, and I was restructuring and rebuilding, and we were looking for both an entry-level PR person, professional, and a department assistant as well. And we, there's this young woman who absolutely very bright, absolutely brilliant, and a young African-American woman. And she'd applied for both positions. And she didn't have PR experience. She'd done a lot of very interesting content, creative work, and so on at her school. And we had another very good candidate for the PR position as well. And so I asked, this young woman, I said, you don't have this specific experience that we're looking for, but so I'm just curious, what you're looking to do. And she told me her plan, which was to go to grad school in London in 2 years, etc. And it became clear that she'd been knocking on doors and doors were not opening to her. And her voice just broke as she said to me, I just need someone to give me a chance. And I remember the feeling of my heart just being pulled. And I thought, if I've achieved anything in my career, it's because of all the people who've helped me, people like Patrice and Faye and so many others, my supervisors, my bosses, people I don't even know who've just been like, okay, we're going to do something, we're going to help her out. And if I don't give her a chance, then who's going to? So I think it's really important for us to remember that we can always be advocates for someone. And even if I feel insecure, which I do at this phase in my career, we all suffer from imposter syndrome. There's always someone we can help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Our time for this panel is up, but I do want to give Min 30 seconds to close us out. Do you have a quick comment to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I promise I'll be quick. I can certainly relate to all the sentiments of the other panelists have brought up. I think I'm still practicing the confidence and the speaking up in my field. And even in this panel, never would I have volunteered to speak in something like this. This is actually my first panel. And so prior to this, I was definitely scared and definitely over prepped. I hope it shows. But yeah, I'm so happy that I'm here and so honored to have been, part of the conversation with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our first panelists. Let's give you all a round of applause. As you all turn off your cameras for now, let me go ahead and turn to tonight's keynote interview with Jeff Yang. So as he joins me on video, I'll just give a very fast background. Jeff, as y'all know, is a veteran journalist, writer, businessman, and business media consultant whose 2-decade career has included multiple successful media and marketing startups. He writes the Dow Jones column, and that's Dow with a T, T-A-O, for the Wall Street Journal. And he is also the author of 2 books that look at the Asian American cultural representation. So his first book was called Rise, a pop culture history of Asian America from the 90s to now. But tonight we're actually going to be talking about his second book. So thank you so much for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you, Bey-Ling. I am so proud to be here and so delighted to actually be in such illustrious company. Listening to this conversation as it has evolved has been so illuminating and so inspiring. So I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you. So Jeff, your second book, which comes in October, is titled The Golden Screen, The Movies That Made Asian America. Now, this book has an introduction by the incomparable Michelle Yeoh and includes commentary and conversations from all the movie stars who, frankly, are basically just proving my father wrong back when he told me to forget about majoring in theater because there were no roles for people who looked like us. Your book includes Simu Liu, Daniel Dae Kim, Ronnie Chang, Ken Jeong, Kelly Marie Tran, and just the list goes on of all the people I follow on Instagram. So here's my first question. You make a point, Jeff, in this book, that American films have actually included Asians for more than a century, going all the way back to Cecil B. DeMille's 1915 silent film, The Cheat. In what ways has Asian American representation in films changed in the last 100 years? And in what ways could even more changes be positive for our communities? And I would say plural on the communities.
Well, I mean, the first thing we have to recognize is that it's still relatively revolutionary for Asian Americans to be allowed to play Asian Americans. Back in the beginning of
Yes.
Hollywood, it was more likely that a prominent Asian American role would be filled by a white person in Asian American makeup or in Asian makeup, which basically meant a thick coat of yellow paint and 45-degree canted eyes, leveraged by tape with, maybe some lacquer on the hair. It was truly not a great time for representation, even though we were there at the very beginning, because these weren't our stories being told and we weren't the ones telling them. You mentioned The Cheat, and The Cheat is really kind of an incredible film. If you are able to see it, it is actually available if you look through the right recesses of YouTube. But it's a film that features Setsu Hayakawa, a Japanese American, one of the great iconic silent film stars of his era. And it's to be remembered here that this is a man whose charisma, whose good looks, whose screen presence was so magnetic that as a Japanese American man, women would literally swoon in theater audiences when watching him on screen. When The Cheat came out, it was actually, there was a warning put out in advertising saying, if you are faint of heart and susceptible to the vapors, watch yourself, because this film is just so sensual that it might actually overtake you. And
Wow.
all this within the context that Setsu Hayakawa was not the star or even the hero of this film. Because of the nature of the times, he was actually the villain. He was a manipulative, cunning seducer who was attempting to essentially commit an act of sexual violence on the white woman ingenue. And he is, in fact, the cheat of the title, right? Today, if Setsu Hayakawa existed, he'd probably be making those steamy movies, the sort of 9.5 weeks / passion-filled, sort of sweaty embrace type films that we all know and love on some level. But back then, Hollywood actually had policies that prevented depiction of romance between non-white people and white people on screen. There was something called the Hays Code that made it illegal to do so. So if it makes you wonder, right? If Hollywood had been different from the beginning, if the initial choices had been different, where would we be today? There were great stars then who could have just filled the world with the plenitude of our narrative. And instead, what we had to fight through was centuries of invisibility before we finally actually made it to the screen today.
Yeah. And, to your point about those early movies, there was very much the typecasting of when Asian actors were allowed to play Asian characters. They were the villains or they were exoticized. Yeah, it's, when Crazy Rich Asians came out, I actually thought to myself, if I had actually studied theater like I wanted to back in the day, I could be a crazy rich Asian by now. But, I just have to console myself that 2 out of 3 isn't bad. Here's my second question. So one of the earliest Asian American movie stars was Anna Marie Wong, who actually has now recently been rediscovered. She actually started her own production company after getting really frustrated with Hollywood and being kind of typecast and stereotyped, just like in the ways that you've talked about. So just this week, Anna Mae Wong got her very own Barbie doll introduced in her honor. I mean, it's beautiful. I would have chilled for this doll as a child. And last October, the US Mint released the Anna Mae Wong Quarter, which is the 5th coin in the Mint's American Women Quarters program. And get this, it's the first ever US currency to feature an Asian American. So Jeff, you're the pop culture expert. What are your thoughts on this, that Anna Mae Wong has been honored in these ways now after all these years?
It's a shame that she wasn't around to see it. One of the things I think that is true about the pioneers of our community is that so many of them who paved the way were not around actually to reap the benefits. Like Moses, they brought us to the mountaintop, but we're not able to enter the valley. And I think that Anna May Wong in particular, part of what makes her so incredibly iconic is that she became a screen star at a time, not just when Asian Americans were not allowed to play prominent roles, we're not even allowed to play ourselves, but at a time when just the industry was so nascent, right? It was still inventing itself. And in order for her to actually be seen, she had to break through the race divide, the gender divide, the stereotype divide. She had to break through the language divide. She, unlike many of us who might have had to actually learn English, she was born in America and raised speaking English. She had to actually fight to be able to speak English on screen. And then once she was able to speak English, she had to fight to speak her own indigenous tongue, her parents' tongue as well, because she played so many roles in which the words put in her mouth were nonsense. People didn't know what Chinese sounded like. By the time she actually was able to make the decision to create stories of her own, there's actually a singular film in which perhaps one of the only, certainly the earliest representation of an Asian American male and an Asian American female having a romantic relationship on screen that she herself produced and starred in with her old childhood friend, actually, Philip Ahn. So the film is called Daughter of Shanghai, and it's essentially kind of a noir thriller, but Philip Ahn, this incredibly handsome man, plays an FBI agent, the kind of romantic hero of this. Anna May Wong plays the daughter of an import-export man who is murdered and then has to unravel the sort of secrets of this conspiracy, the sort of human trafficking conspiracy that he had been pulled into unwillingly. And at the very end of it, there's this moment where Philip Ahn, who's Korean American, speaks Toisanese to Anna May Wong, and she responds in kind. Probably the first time that Chinese dialect was actually spoken on screen with that actually meant something. And basically, Philip says to her something along the lines of, I would love you to spend more time with me. And then she responds, that makes me very happy, right? But it's on the heels basically of him proposing that she move with him to Washington, D.C. She has nothing left here, in I think it was set in San Francisco, or in Los Angeles. So come with me and basically marry me. And again, it would take so many decades before we once again saw that kind of romantic relationship between two Asian Americans. The fact that had to be revolutionary is still kind of mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we could just keep talking all day, but we don't have the time. For my last question, I want to bring us from the past into the present. So right now, in this current moment, the climate just feels really different, right? For Asian American representation, there are so many new and brilliant and original movies and TV shows coming out featuring Asian American casts, and they're telling unique Asian American stories that speak to our Americanness as much as they speak to our Asianness. So Jeff, I'm wondering, what do you think has changed to make this possible? Oh, did we lose you? Are you frozen? Uh-oh. I think we may have lost him. Tech support, anyone? Okay. So since we appear to have lost Jeff, I'm sure he had a really great answer to that. Well, you know what? I'm just going to say thank you to Jeff because we do need to move on. And I'm going to go ahead and share that I cannot wait to buy a copy of The Golden Screen, especially because our viewers tonight will be getting, after this show, we'll be getting a special promo code to pre-order the book. And TBBH, I'm going to totally buy an extra copy for my dad. So thank you again, Jeff, for being with us today. And I'm so sorry that you froze out at the last minute. Now, let me shift to our second panel. So if our second group of panelists could please turn on your camera. Our second panel is called Shaping the Future in Brands, Film, and Culture. And so we have with us Debbie Iba-Lobo, who is Director of Global External and Financial Communications at the Coca-Cola Company. We also have Moon Kim, EVP at M Booth and VP of Communications with the Korean American Association of Greater New York. We also are joined by Lori Teranishi, who is founder and CEO of IQ360 Inc., and Nirmala Singh, who is Vice President with Zeno Group. So welcome, everybody, and thank you all so much for being here. Okay, so I'm going to ask each panelist a direct question, just like we did with the first panel, and then we'll do questions across the board as time permits. So let me start with Lori to kind of transition from John in the first panel. So Lori, as I know you heard, John and Oda connected the dots for us, and just in such a profound wine need drinking way about why a piece of folks should care about corporate ESG. Would you elaborate specifically on the influence of native Hawaiian cultural values on ESG and how these might shape the future of sustainability communications for different brands?
Yes, happy to. Well, now you see why I have an excuse to drink wine, copious amounts of wine. It's because John and I work together. He's my longtime mentor, and I've heard a lot of this for years, and I agree with him, by the way. And I do think ESG is something that I think in particular the AAPI community has a lot to contribute to. In Hawaii, particularly where IQ360 is headquartered, we see ESG practices being entrenched in the Native Hawaiian and Asian Pacific Islander communities, because these values that these groups have really guide our business community here, and have really put Hawaii on the forefront of ESG action and ESG communications. We were the first state in the nation to declare a 100% renewable energy goal, and we're on pace to meet that goal actually ahead of schedule. And the reason why is that we are an island community, right? So Pacific Islanders are going to be affected by all these bad things John talked about in disproportionate numbers, because sea level rise will, take away our land and affect, a lot of other things here. And so my premise is that if we all operated around the world as if we lived on an island, I think we could accelerate ESG, to orders of magnitude that it needs to be accelerated for us to fight this threat that all of us are facing. And so in terms of lessons we can learn that we see on the ground here in Hawaii, one is I believe we have an alternative model of leadership here in Hawaii that the world, frankly, can learn from. And in Hawaii, our Native Hawaiian, indigenous culture, our Asian cultures really influence the behavior of people sort of at all strata of society. Family and community are revered. The land and the water are cherished. Everyone is worthy of respect. Taking care of each other is deeply ingrained, because you're going to see your governor walking, at the grocery store. I mean, maybe that's probably an overstatement, but, you see elected officials all the time. It's a small community. And being humble is important. Kindness is important. And so this really sets the tone, number one, for an inclusive workplace. And leaders here are expected to demonstrate humility, empathy. They're also expected to roll up their sleeves and do the work alongside the people that work with them. So my father, who was the CEO of a major company here, you would often see him at company lunches, stacking up the chairs and cleaning up along with everyone else. And that's expected. It's not like, oh, that's a really humble CEO. It's like, if you don't do it, what kind of CEO are you? And I think that attitude really paves the way for leaders here to care actively about their communities, care about social inequity. They don't have to be told like, oh, hey, we set these KPIs that are going to be in our ESG report, so we better do it. You know, it's sort of part of the way we were raised here and our belief system. And then secondly, diversity. A lot of the people that have spoken have talked about why diversity is important. And I think all of us participating know that. But we are in Hawaii, we're the most diverse state in the union. We have the highest percentage of mixed race and indigenous people in the country because we have so many immigrants. I'm talking about on a per capita basis because we have so many immigrants who came all at once from Japan, China, Korea, the Philippines to work on the sugar plantation. So it's kind of like a social experiment, but they didn't mean to have it be that. It just sort of happened organically. And these cultures found a way to coexist harmoniously. And so today in Hawaii, our culture and society derive from the shared immigrant history combined with our native Hawaiian indigenous culture and history. And so we have this unique perspective and value system that seems to me sort of what the world needs right now as we face climate change, a lot of social inequity, technology disruption, and the like. And so, you know, in our practice in ESG, we really see that we've come to this tipping point in corporate communications where actions really do speak louder than words. And others on this call have spoken about authenticity. And I think that today ESG really presents an opportunity for corporations to sort of fully embrace their values and be rewarded, frankly, for effectively communicating their authenticity as we do in Hawaii.
Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing that. You know, what you shared about political elected leaders from Hawaii actually makes a lot of sense to me, because when you look at the history of political representation of APISA folks, right, in the US Congress, the first APISA person elected to the US Senate was Hiram Fong, elected in 1959 from Hawaii. The first APISA woman to go to Congress was Patsy Mink, elected in 1964 to the US House, also from Hawaii. But, you know, I'll just put in a plug for California because the very first political leader elected to the Congress was Dalip Singh Sund, who was actually from California, elected to the House in 1956. Let me go ahead and transition to Debbie. So Debbie, in your role at the Coca-Cola Company, you handle global crisis communications, which sometimes involves political leaders, sometimes involves ESG and sustainability. And I know you also sit on the alumni board of the Grady College of Communications, the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia, which is where you were the first in your family to earn a college degree. So based on your background, Debbie, and your experiences, what do you think we need to be doing as public relations educators and practitioners to best shape the future for APISA students?
Thanks, Bey-Ling. I'm going to start as an anecdote in terms of kind of my experience first, and then chat through kind of my learnings through that experience. So moved around a lot, was born in the Philippines, moved to Scotland, and then eventually made it to a rural part of the United States where, you know, my culture, my experience was my own and no one else could speak to it. But in doing that and moving around a lot, you become very self-aware. You start to recognize the differences from yourself and others, but also you start to yearn for folks that you can model, right? I think a lot of my learning was through modeling. And, you know, some of my favorite teachers in high school were scientists. So naturally, when I first was looking into college, actually was recruited to go into science, and did that for, you know, a few summers in high school, and had a meandering road that eventually led me to the profession I'm at today, which now I'm at Coca-Cola in communications. And I think unless I had these three bits, I would not be where I am today, and that's support. So first and foremost, you mentioned that, you know, I'm the first in my family to graduate college. I needed financial support. I was lucky enough to get that from my university, from my college, as well as through other scholarships. So that was an integral part. In getting those scholarships, also started to get exposure. So that's the second bit, exposure to a network of communicators and folks that could, again, I could model and learn from. And then lastly, it's visibility. You know, one of my first internships in New York City, I met Patrice Tanaka, who was referenced a few moments ago as well. And she just exuded joy, and she was leading this communications, you know, agency. And it was my first kind of model that I saw that, wow, you could do this and you could be happy, and, you know, you can check a lot of different boxes. I think for a long time, even to this day, my parents still ask me, am I going to be a lawyer? Because they don't understand what success looks like in this field, because they've only been exposed to the things that they've been exposed to. Now that I'm in an organization like Coke, I think these same principles are still in effect and create a flywheel. You know, a lot of the conversations that we've spoken previously is around having those tough conversations. I think one of my ways to get into a conversation is to be curious about it. But in order for my curiosity to blossom, I need to have support for people that can answer the questions, you know, take the time. Additionally, I needed models, right? Again, that exposure to the folks that are able to share how they're asking those questions, right? Then you start to pick and choose the bits that feel comfortable to you, that really are authentic to you. And then you start to have those conversations more frequently. So you start to ask more questions. And the last bit is the visibility part. I think in doing things like this and doing things at Coke, what happens is then students or you know, young professionals start to reach out, right? And then it's now your turn, right? And that flywheel just keeps going. So I think, you know, early in my career, I've been fortunate enough to have those elements work out for me. But now that I'm at Coke, I'm starting to see that those still are present, and I can still have an impact in a way that creates momentum that folks before me were able to do. Now it's our turn.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really love that about just being given the chance and then being exposed to mentors and networks, and then taking advantages of the opportunities that we get to be visible, right? Moon, on the topic of visibility and opportunity, let me turn to you next. So from K-pop to K-dramas to Samsung phones like the one on my desk and LG appliances like the ones in my house, the influence of Korean products and brands has really gained steam since Gangnam Style was released in 2012. For the young folks who don't know what that is, use Google, but not now. How do you think this higher profile, Moon, of a cultural motherland has shaped the future for young Americans, especially those of Korean heritage?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And I love this question because I thought about me as my younger self and me right now. And when I was trying to answer it, and I sort of find, like, of course, like the higher profile of the cultural motherland, I think it's a source of pride, right? For old and young, especially Korean Americans in this example. I think it's a source of pride because it shows that we finally made it to the global stage. We're not just popular nationally, domestically, we resonate. Also, it signifies our cultural importance, mainstream appeal, but I think more importantly, it allows younger generations that might be further away from their cultural motherland to stay connected, to stay closer. And so I thought about myself. I left Korea when I was 3, and then I grew up in Oklahoma, so not too far from you, Bey-Ling. And I remember I didn't have that much access. Of course, in my own home, I had the Korean culture, but outside of my home, I did not. And I think if I had that, I certainly wouldn't have tried so hard to mute my differences, because all I wanted to do was just fit in, not stand out. The fact that my name was Moon was already terrible enough. And so I just wanted to really just stay in a corner, not be noticed. So I think of now myself, like, and now my children have access to more our cultural stories, our culture being louder. And I find myself being prouder because they're going to not be so shy and they're going to embrace their culture. And so that makes me really grateful, because I think the stereotypes, they're tired and true, old and tired, and they weren't written by us. So when we own our own stories, even as Jeff said, like, we now have the chance to own our own stories, tell them, be loud about that, and not instead like mute our differences. I think that is already a big start that hopefully my children see that they have a leg up, because I certainly felt like I wasn't proud until much later.
I so hear you on having that weird name. And Texas and Oklahoma are close geographically, but culturally worlds apart. All right, so let me take it to Nirmala. At Zeno Group, your work focuses on food and beverage promotions and media relations, and you're also part of the company's mentor program. So Nirmala, could you tell us about the importance of mentorship on your own career? And what are some pro tips that you would offer for both mentors and mentees?
Yes, well, thank you, number one, for having me here tonight. It's an honor to speak with you. And I mean, even through this panel alone, I've already connected on so many levels, both with Debbie and Moon's experiences. I mean, with Debbie, the same thing. I feel like for me, when I started my career, actually when I was in college, of course, like typical brown parents, Nirmala, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a nurse, go to school for nursing. And of course, went, majored in nursing, took my biology classes, aced it, and still it just wasn't for me. Like, I did not feel like I was that Grey's Anatomy character. I couldn't do it. So I actually thankfully had a cousin in the family who was already in the PR industry, and that was like a mentor for me. So again, if our families didn't start to expand into this industry, they wouldn't have known. If you ask my parents today, they probably still think I make ads on TV. They don't know what I do, but which parents do in this group. So, but I do have to say, just from the mentor that I had in my own family, because I also ended up going into PR, now 2 more of my cousins are also going into PR. So again, I do think it's a generational thing, and I do make it a point to post about the things that I do so that people understand what I do, so that they can also make that connection on their level as well. And when I first started my career, someone actually taught me the difference between a manager and a mentor. Typically, you don't know that difference. No one ever tells you. And sure, they can be similar, but they are different. And I think that is something we don't realize and something that we don't teach to a lot of people. So as I grew in my career, I had a new mentor for each phase of my life. Like, think about all the levels you go through as an intern, a AAE, an AE, and through the ranks. And because of their perspectives on what they brought to the table, I think that's what makes me who I am today as well. Each of my mentor relationships developed mutual trust and confidence. They maintained confidentiality, and they listened to what I had to say, but they also listened to how I said it. Oftentimes, the way that we express how we're feeling is through our emotions. And I remember having a manager, I was upset in the moment, and she was like, I can tell you're angry, but you just have to get over it. And I was like, whoa, that is not what I was expecting. I wanted someone to be able to, hear where I was coming from, and then also try to put themselves in my situation and just try to give me a different perspective. So that's actually something that I do with my mentors today. Zeno does have a program where we are able to mentor anyone in the agency. Doesn't matter which office you're in. So I do that program every 3 months. You get a new mentor, but I actually still continue to talk to all of my mentees. So those are people and relationships I've grown over the past 7 years that I've been here. So even my mentors that no longer work here are now in the industry doing big things as well, and some people that I still keep in contact with. And it's important to have those relationships and making sure you're staying close, because again, like, they're also going so far in the industry and also experiencing new challenges and opportunities that you can also shed light on to your mentees as well. And lastly, I would like to share one piece of advice that I actually got from my mentor today. And he actually told me, anytime you walk into a new situation and you feel like you're about to judge someone or be critical, try not to. Just be curious and not judgmental, which he actually told me he got from Ted Lasso. So fun fact, but that is just definitely something that really hit home with me today. And I was like, wow, I really should just take a step back and really try to see all paths and how I can like help my mentors and mentees.
Wow, Nirmala, that was so much. And I'll just, I could respond to so many things, but I will just say this, that whole try not to judge. I think for many of us, especially children of immigrant parents, where you constantly feel like somebody's judging you, if not your parents directly, people in the community, it is a lifetime of unlearning the things that we have learned, right? And to the points that some others have made earlier, what helped us survive to this point is not necessarily what helps us survive into the future. So we do need to make those adjustments, right? So, okay, let me go ahead then and open it up to some general questions. And I'm just going to start by asking all the other folks who are with us on panel to chime in about mentorship. So just like Nirmala was sharing at the end there, what are some pro tips that you offer to both mentors and mentees? And audience, remember, this is also your chance to jump in with questions that you might have in the Q&A forum. So who'd like to go first on the panel? Just jump in.
I can jump in. I guess the tip for mentors, I would say, is actually don't, I think in my, I don't want to give out my age, but let's say I've been working for 20 years almost. And I will say I've started to seek out mentors more, and not those just at my peer level or even higher, but even younger. So I think that's one tip I would have, like, there's so many ways you can learn from the young and the youth. They teach you so much. They have a different outlook. And I'm proud to lead a multi-generational team. And while that does bring challenges, I think it brings so much more greater rewards. And then for mentees, I would say that don't look at just one person to fulfill everything. Your needs change. So have a couple, to always be open, and sometimes, say thank you, and you could evolve and meet other people that could help you. But also look for outside your industry. I think, industries are colliding now. There's so many things you can learn by seeking a mentor from a different sector.
I'll go next. One of the bits that I continue hearing is, practice, right? Practice. I think what I found when I am mentoring is getting really tactical. So I go to the point of, let's an example of, a salary conversation. Let's role play this, where my mentee will go, okay, this is what I'm thinking. And then we chat through the ways that she could have that conversation. So both on the mentor and mentee side, don't be afraid to ask like the details, because I think oftentimes the guidance is quite nebulous, that you feel as if like, I get it, I understand it, but what does this mean in terms of a next step? And I think getting really tactical, and that role-playing example, it has been very helpful in trying to guide younger professionals as they navigate questions or conversations that they're a little bit afraid to have.
I'll offer a perspective that's maybe in contrast to what Debbie said. I agree, Debbie, with everything you said about practice and tactics, but on the flip side, I also think one thing I try to tell the people I work with is that there's a difference between a leader and a manager. And sometimes it's really easy to focus on our task list. I'm like a checklist person. I just get joy out of checking off as many tasks as I can. But when so managers really focus on their tasks and getting things done and the process. But when we talk about some of the topics we've been talking about, the technological threats, the climate threats ahead of us, that really requires leadership. And so some of the things that people have brought up, John Iwata brought up, speaking up or declaring your aspiration, leveraging the trust relationships you have. adequately. And John Onoda talking about, using opportunities in front of the C-suite as dress rehearsals. All of that, I think, is really important to develop this leadership mindset, and also to not think of, really put yourself in these leaders' shoes. And what are they looking at? What do they care about? And then adapting your message so that they see you as a leader and that you're modeling those behaviors. It's sort of always looking sort of 2-3 steps ahead. How do you do that? You have to read voraciously, read the things they're reading, the Wall Street Journal, listen to podcasts that really stretch your mind. I mean, sometimes I have to listen to some podcasts that I don't understand a couple times, but that's all investing in your future as a leader, as opposed to, you tapping out as a manager.
It's really hard for me to hear all the great advice, try to take notes that I can reflect back on later and be the moderator. But I'm working on it. So does anybody else have anything else that they want to add to this conversation? This has just been so amazing.
Just one build, Bey-Ling. I think oftentimes when we think of success, we think of, the title. I think reframing success from whatever that is for people about the journey of learning, because curiosity can really take us a long way. And I think if you have that as a North Star, it's a game changer.
Thank you so much. That has just been the best way, Debbie, to kind of wrap up this this particular session. I mean, we really could chat all night with these fabulous panelists, but now I need to kind of move us along to our program's closing keynote, which is by Richard Louie. So thank you so much, panelists, for being here. Thank you for all of your great wisdom. So we actually had a last minute decision between Richard and myself to kind of switch it up a bit. Instead of Richard doing a keynote, we're more going to have a conversation. So as you all know, Richard is currently a breaking news anchor with MSNBC, NBC. He has 30+ years of experience in news and other content creation at the intersection of race, journalism, business, politics, and community. He is a book author, a documentary filmmaker, a humanitarian ambassador, but also, as we heard last year on this program, Richard is a son, a brother, and a mental health advocate. Our conversation last year was pre-recorded, and I'm so pleased to welcome Richard tonight, live and in person, back at the Museum of Public Relations. So thank you so much for being here, Richard.
Hey, Bey-Ling, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. And, the only sad thing about the fact that we're doing a convo instead of me handing it off to you is I had written in my script, I got to say the line, "Now back to you, Richard." I don't get to say it. So, that's just too bad for me. So, Richard, some of the things that perhaps you didn't catch because, you weren't able to be with us during the whole 2 hours, which is totally understandable. Carmela Glover from the Diversity Action Alliance presented some data on AAPI representation in the public relations and communications industries.
Right.
So for everybody who joined us a little bit late, it's a good news, bad news scenario. We're there. We're in relatively good percentages, 8%. But there's almost nothing at the senior most levels. And so I know that, Richard, you've been working with some folks on another study on AAPIs for executive leadership in general, not specific to communications, I believe, but executive leadership in general. Will you just kind of walk us briefly through some of those recent findings and why, what can we learn from that? So we know it's not just us in the comms industry.
Yeah, Bey-Ling, as you close a great session for Heritage Month, and I can't thank the Museum of PR and yourself for leading us through this evening, that, as we try to understand from my perspective as a journalist narrative, and we're as we look at the narrative of who we are and how we can control it, those are the two things, right? We can't necessarily control the way others see us, but we can control what we understand of ourselves. And so what came of the last 2 years was, what can we do if we're champions of inclusion at various levels within organizations? And well, if we wanted to do that, do we have all the information we need? Do we have all of the data that we can go to a boardroom, that we can go to executive leadership and say, the narrative is misunderstood. It's not right. We're not talking about it openly. We're not talking about it internally. And the Museum of Public Relations, this is right down your alley, right? As we try to understand narrative. And so one of the things that we discovered in this study, which was focused again at executive leaders, how can they start making decisions that help to change the narrative internally, as well as that which they put out. And one of the things that was very important, I thought, was 1 in 2 AAPI workers do not feel like the model at work. But the narrative of who we are is that we are the model. Now, you know exactly where we're going in this question because that's the perception at all times. Another misunderstanding of what the narrative might be around AAPIs at work is that, well, we don't have a bite, right? We're not gonna, if it's not right. 1 in 3 AAPIs have considered a lawsuit based on the way they've been treated because of their identity or background. And those are the sorts of pieces of data that you can go forward into leadership and say, let's redefine what you think AAPI workers are in your organization. And that is so important because it's misunderstood. Number one, that we are the model. We don't think we're the model. We're not. Okay. And on top of that, when you look at will we bite back, we will. It has been discussed. This data, which was done with AAPI data by this survey and study, which just came out for the month of May with Ascend, is so important. One last data point. 4 in 10 AAPI workers think they are underrepresented in DEI leadership. AAPI workers are not satisfied. Their faces aren't in the spaces they think at an adequate level or number. One last one, since we're talking about numbers, I thought was so important about narrative internally, as well as you push out through the organizations that you serve, is that the triad of triads, which is, I guess let me change my name. Okay. The triad of triads was ERG, BRG, DEI. When you have those in place, your retention doubles with AAPI workers. So we do care about this stuff. It is part of the way that we view value. And so I think we need to re-understand, both when we have internal projects or outward facing projects about this community, to re-look at what the stereotypes around narrative is.
Yeah, Richard, one of the things that you said just really was literally shocking to me. About 1 in 3 AAPIs in the survey had considered a lawsuit.
Yes.
Earlier today we had Kaylee So, who directed the Harvest on, and she was talking about how, Southeast Asians from her culture, and so many of us were raised to be quiet. We're raised to not raise a fuss. We're raised to just keep calm, carry on, just, keep your head down, get the work done.
That's right.
This is a wake-up call to organizations that things may soon be changing. I just find that really quite shocking. But, we only have 11 minutes left, so I don't have a lot of time to dwell in my shock, because I want to say something else, which is that last year when we had this conversation, you shared about your book, looking at mental health and caregiving. I know that in the last year, you've had some additional challenges in the caregiving aspect of your identity. In the positive aspect of your professional identity, you've also now produced a new movie, right, related to mental health and caregiving. Can you just share a really quick little bit about that movie and tell us what you think these items, this book, this movie, what do these say about the narrative of what we're saying tonight, APISA folks in American culture?
The important part of what public relations and marketing communications and marketing professionals hold in business is that they create, as I was talking about earlier, the understandings or misunderstandings of where we are going and what we are today. And one of the hurts and the pains that I saw as a journalist and an anchor over the last 3 years is that every one of the stories that continue today, our stomach turns, our heart skips a beat, and that affects our mental health. And those are intertwined. I just came back from Washington, D.C., as many of the participants did today, from the White House Initiative on AA and NHPIs, which they do every year, and was chairing a conversation about mental health in the AAPI community. Now, if stress or trauma, repeated stress and repeated trauma, is an indication of our physical health as well, this community is not doing well. Mm-hmm. And the other stereotype is that we're not a community that can express it very well. I would underline, all communities don't express it well. All communities don't quite understand what it is. And so the film that came out, which is called Unconditional, and our good friend Bill Amato was actually there for the world premiere at Universal Studios in Hollywood.
You didn't invite me? Up with him separately. Keep going.
Yeah, Bey-Ling, yes, right. How could we forget Cal State Fullerton? We were right there, and the purpose of the film has many, one of which is to open the door of what families are in our community as well as others. And so it follows 3 families as they battle that understanding of what mental health might be. And one of those families is mine. And as I went through caring for my father in the last 9 years, I lost him a year ago, but it was strange for me to kind of reveal how I was, battling both physical and mental health together, and how it was difficult for me. And so yesterday was a big moment in hoping to open the tent of what we are globally as a community of so many different origin countries, and to show that we're American and that we're part of the same conversation. Unfortunately, the same hurts, but fortunately, part of the same strengths. And mental health can be a strength. And that is the misunderstanding. As we celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month and AAPI Heritage Month, or AANHPI Heritage Month, that is why we decided to release the movie now, is because the pains, the joys, the strengths are uniquely ours, but not uniquely ours at the same time. So as we close today's great gathering, Bey-Ling, I think by sharing these ideas of data and narrative and hurts and strengths, it is definitely a mix of heart and mind that I'm trying to bring to this closing conversation. And I'm so glad knowing you and having you and I have spoken many times now, that you would absolutely understand that this is probably better because it's human to human, right?
Yeah, Richard, what you just said about expanding our definition of family, 100%. We are a community, but we're also made up of communities, plural. Yeah. And we need to work together and we need to support each other. What you said about the film Unconditional, telling unique stories that are very specific to 3 families, and yet at the same time not unique, yes, right? Because they're universal and they speak to the human experience. I think this is an excellent segue to the beginning of this program 2 hours ago. I pointed out then that our program is about the AAPI community influence on brands, film, and culture. But to say that something is an influence on something implies that they're separate. And really, AAPI influence is often the brand. It is often the film. It is often the culture. And our experience in our communities, plural, is uniquely ours, but it's also a universal experience that many people who don't look like us and who have different backgrounds and heritages can still be a part of. So,
I love that point really quickly, and I know you've got a ticking clock. Somehow I got you on that one. Is that is that, you know, influence on others starts with accepting of others.
Yes. 100%.
Seeing others. And
Yes.
these two things are so important. And as this is both done by my not-for-profit. If we can't see each other and hear and smell and talk and think and feel each other, how can we influence each other?
Yes. And then along the lines of mental health, I'll also say this. You are so right that seeing others means accepting others first. Accepting others also means accepting ourselves first, right? And all of our own complexities. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining the Museum of Public Relations again this year and being with us live. I just so appreciate you for taking time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bey-Ling. Thank you to Museum of PR. See you soon.
Yeah, bye. So we have run out of time, and I know that the panelists will be open to the students and the other pros on the call today, connecting with us via LinkedIn, via whatever platforms. Let's just continue the conversation. We just have heard so much amazing advice from so many people, and I want to go back to the advice that many of us have talked about, which is being there for each other, creating chances and opportunities for each other, being part of each other's networks, or as Richard would say, being part of each other's professional families. Let's just all try to stay in conversation. So let me wrap up by saying this. As we work collectively on shifting and shaping the future of a PISA influence on brands, film, and culture, I have to note that in many spaces and in many places, the very concept of DEI is under attack. And that itself is impacting our mental health, as Richard would say. And frankly, it's also really, really hard when you're attacked to not fight back in ways that are ultimately not helpful to the cause. So in closing, I'm just going to say this in homage to actor Kelly Marie Tran and her Star Wars character, Rose Tycho, with this paraphrase: we are going to win this DEI war. We will. But we're not going to do it by fighting what we hate. We have to do it by saving what we love. May the force be with us. Let me hand it back to Matilda.
Thank you so much, Bey-Ling. What an evening. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. And a special thank you again to Bey-Ling for taking us through the event and bringing all these fantastic, inspirational, and foremost important stories to life. This year's Celebrating AAPI History program is sponsored in part by the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication Department of Advertising and Public Relations at the University of Georgia, the IW Group, Google, Pat Ford, Hunter PR, the Joyful Planet, the Diversity Action Alliance, and Compro. Our next event will be held on June 15th in order to celebrate Pride Month. And please, everyone, look out in your email inboxes for the upcoming days where we're going to share an interview with Lynn Choi, a PR pioneer, and the same discount code that you got earlier from Jeff Jang. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening.